I decided to keep with December holidays as the theme for the month, as there are so many of them. Yes, I do most of them on Christmas, but that's because it's what I know best. I've read the Christmas story to my kids every year, always out of Luke, never noticing that if you put it together with the Matthew story, you just can't make a single plausible narrative out of it. Thus, when believers talk about the Christmas story, they either focus on only one of the stories or they pick parts from both that work together, ignoring the parts that don't. The video that I am featuring here is no different. It's a recent docudrama by David Jeramiah. If you don't know who David Jeramiah is, he was considered about 2 steps lower than God by many who I went to church with. At a school function, a speaker was talking about just how devoted to God Jeremiah is when he took the stance that he would rather his child be dead than wear 2 different colors of fabric. I have searched for this quote but have found it nowhere, so I don't know that he actually ever said this. Some of the Christians in the video are wearing mixed colors of fabric, so if he did ever have this position, he seems to have changed his mind. I'm playing the drama parts sped up, partly because it's too long otherwise, even just using clips, and partly because it's more amusing. The video is called Why the Nativity? Let's have a chat. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and especially to my patrons and channel members. Why the Nativity? Why indeed?
Why the Nativity? Is it just another historic event? Just another superstition? Or a leftover fairy tale from childhood?
No, yes, and yes.
To answer these questions, it will require the Word of God to be our guide and our imagination to tell the story.
Why? If you really have the Word of God, and it really tells you all you need to know about it, why would you need imagination to fill in the missing details? What really does take imagination is trying to make this story fit into history, and to make the 2 different versions of the story, the Matthew version and the Luke version, fit together. The drama focuses mainly on the Luke version, but it has bits of the Matthew version as well. They were careful to leave out the parts of both to make the story flow. It couldn't have been to make the story short enough to fit into a 90-minute video. After all, you can read both entire stories in under 5 minutes. The video starts with the birth of John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin once removed. I'm going to skip that part.
What was it about the vast Roman Empire that was ideal for the coming of Christ? The Romans themselves unknowingly were part of the answer. For the first time in history, the Mediterranean world, the cradle of civilization, was unified. All roads led to Rome, and Roman roads led almost everywhere on earth.
That is certainly an elitist view of the world. Alexander the Great's empire was at least as vast as the Roman Empire at that time. Here's Alexander's empire, and here's Rome. At the birth of Jesus, not all of the green parts were Rome yet. They were by 14 AD. The red parts come even later. He means that Rome was able to spread the gospel to Europe, whereas if Jesus had been born during the rule of Alexander the Great, the gospel would have gone more east and less north and west. If Christianity was actually a good thing, this would be good for you as a European descendant, but not so much for the Middle and Far East. Considering world population is greater in those areas, it actually would have been better for Jesus to have been born during the time of Alexander. The gospel would have reached more people in its infancy. If the goal is really to get as many people to heaven as possible, Jesus was born too late. But if there really was a God that cared about reaching humans with the gospel message, why have Jesus ascend at all? Why not stay and keep spreading the gospel? In his semi-ghost state, he could travel anywhere he wanted instantaneously. If he has that capability now, it's weird that he hasn't been heard from since he died. You would think if getting his message out was what he wanted, he'd actually be doing that.
All roads led to Rome, and Roman roads led almost everywhere on earth, including Jerusalem, and the entire region around where Roman ruler Herod the Great ruled with an iron fist and a troubled heart.
Point of clarification here. Herod was not a Roman ruler. Judea was an allied kingdom. That's why he was King Herod, not Governor Herod. He was installed as king by Rome, and Rome had a lot of influence in Judea. But Judea was not yet a Roman province. That won't come until 6 CE, which is actually quite important to the story.
The miserable king was worried about death. At the same time, someone was coming to conquer him. He was making funeral arrangements.
In a world of violence and retribution, he would teach to love one's enemies. In a world of death, he offered hope of new and eternal life. The Romans dominated through the power of terror. He would dominate through love.
Right. That's why he said he didn't come to bring peace but a sword. That's why he talked about hell more than anyone else in the Bible. Because he loves you.
And if you do any of these 10 things, he has a special place full of fire and smoke and burning and torture and anguish, where he will send you to live and suffer and burn and choke and scream and cry forever and ever till the end of time. But he loves you.
And it came to pass in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus. So all went to be registered, every one to his own city.
The empire of Rome was taking names, and all those Israelites who descended from King David were instructed to report to their hometown of Bethlehem, Mary and Joseph included.
This is a novel claim, that the census was just of the people of the line of David, not of all the people. There are a lot of problems with this interpretation. The first is it says that everyone registered for the census in this passage, not just those of the line of David. Second, why would Caesar care about Herod's idiosyncrasies? They were not on bad terms, but interrupting commerce throughout the entire empire just to ease Herod's paranoia is a bit much, don't you think? Next, some versions of the text say the census was for a tax. There was a tax census taken in 6 CE that could be the one referred to in the Luke version of the story, and many Bible scholars point to that census, as the census referred to in this passage, as proof of the historicity of the Nativity story. Which brings us to the final issue. This isn't historically possible. The Luke passage is clear that this was done while Quirinius was governor of Syria. The producers conveniently left that part of the Bible story out. Quirinius became governor of Syria in 6 CE. Herod the Great died in 4 BCE. This census wasn't taken until 10 years after Herod died. Believers often claim that maybe Quirinius was governor twice. He wasn't. Quintilius Varus was governor of Syria at Herod's death. Some say, okay, Quirinius could have been lieutenant governor under Varus. Not only is that unsupported by any documentation, we also know where Quirinius was from 12 BCE to 1 BCE. He was in Galatia, fighting the Homanides. It was Quirinius' success as a legate in this war that got him awarded the governorship of Syria, when Judea was annexed into Syria, and Judea first became a Roman province and not an allied kingdom in 6 CE. When Herod died, he divided his kingdom between his 3 sons. Herod Archelaus was given Judea. Uprisings began shortly after, and Varus put down the uprisings. This is the event that caused Rome to annex Judea. So the text of Luke cannot be fit into Roman history. Quirinius did indeed take a census upon becoming governor of Syria. As a new province, Caesar needed a census to determine tax assessments in this new province, and historically this did happen, but not until 10 years after Herod had died. Further, in order to assess what property a person has for taxation, the census taker would need to travel to the homes of the people, not the people to the census taker. To have them travel to a different province from where they live is downright ludicrous. It would be like the United States deciding to have a property tax and asking the residents of each state to travel to where their ancestors first arrived in the United States, if they are not indigenous people, in order to assess their property. No, you have to have the people stay home and have the tax assessor come and see what property they have to assess. If the people go travel somewhere else to register for a census, a place where they don't own property, the entire census is useless. This is the biggest historical issue with the Christmas story. The only way to fix it is to admit that Luke got the wrong event into his story. Clearly, that census did not occur while Herod was alive. There is also no record of any census that ever required people to travel to the home of their ancestral birth. The census story was clearly contrived to make a reason for Mary and Joseph to go to Bethlehem when they lived in Nazareth. The Matthew version of the story has them just living in Bethlehem. There was no census and no travel. But then you don't get the nativity of them in the stable, when Jesus was far more likely born at his parents' house. You don't get the picture of the humble king with the lowly birth. All you get is an ordinary birth. I do think that Jesus was a real person. When he was born and where? I have no idea. History is unclear on this. All we have is the gospel accounts, which don't agree on when or give sufficient detail to say that it really was in Bethlehem. The authors clearly wanted him to fulfill a prophecy, so they put it in Bethlehem. Since neither of the authors ever likely met Jesus, or even anyone who did meet Jesus, they just had stories that they heard to go by. But the Luke version of the story, the one most often told, has the most implausible and historically inaccurate narrative to get the Holy Family to the right location. Another possibility is that Jesus' stories are about several different preachers, all attributed to a single person. Then the narratives also make more sense, as each version could be telling of the birth of different preachers, whose teachings were combined and attributed to Jesus.
And though Mary was now great with child, they began their trek to Bethlehem, the city of David, to register for the Roman taxation.
And now the census of who is in the line of David goes back to the traditional story of it being a tax. What was the purpose of all that stuff about Herod's paranoia leading to the census, only then to wipe that part out and go back to it being a tax census, not a genealogy census? Pick a lane. I skipped several minutes of this travel. It was boring and added nothing to the story. You're welcome.
Bethlehem would play host to the Nativity, an event that the world hardly noticed, yet an event that changed the destiny of every human creature.
Which is why the story is just a story. The world didn't notice, yet you want to claim this to be the most important thing for everyone to know about. You would think if an omniscient God actually thought it important that people know the real story, he would have arranged for a scribe or a historian to make the journey with them, or at least have one waiting for them when they arrive in Bethlehem to get all the details accurately. But alas, all we get is hand-me-down stories. Tells much about what your God really thinks about accuracy.
Everyone else passed it by without much notice. So that upon that amazing day, when a peasant and his betrothed wife...
Wait a minute. Betrothed? You showed them getting married. Oh, wait, sorry, I skipped that part. Here, let's back it up.
Joseph would take Mary as his wife. He would be the earthly father to the Christ child. He would postpone his desires for the will of God, and in this plan he believed.
And Joseph did as the angel of the Lord commanded him, and took to him his wife, and did not know her, till she had brought forth her firstborn son. And he called
There.
his name
You
Jesus.
shook them getting married, and now they're just betrothed? Goodness, you can't even get your own version of the story straight. This has absolutely nothing to do with the story, but it was fun, so I played some of it. Likely, that's the only reason it was included. The story is old and dry, and it needs something to keep audience interest.
The best and worst of Bethlehem commingling to survive, to find food, and to secure lodging.
It just wouldn't be a Christian video if we didn't find some way to include shaming of sex workers, now would it? Honestly, this also isn't part of the story. Why are Christians so obsessed with sex? Maybe if they had a little more, they wouldn't need to talk about it all the time.
Joseph would be overwhelmed by what he found. Mary could deliver the Son of God at any moment, and so a desperate search began to find shelter.
This is another part of the story that doesn't make sense. The journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem is about 90 miles, about 4 days. Why did Joseph even take Mary with him? She could have delivered at any point on the journey. And then, if he had to be there on a certain day to register, he wouldn't make it. If he didn't need to be there on a certain day, why did he leave now? How much time did he need to register? And how much time did he have to do it? Leaving Mary at home, he could have traveled much faster and been back, if not for the birth, at least within a day or two after. Sure, he'd like to be there for the event, but he has no part in it. His arrival a day or two later wouldn't be anything novel. But no, God doesn't care about Mary's health and well-being, just making sure that this prophecy gets fulfilled. It's not like God could have had them living in Bethlehem to start with. Oh wait, that's the Matthew version of the story. Yeah, God absolutely could have had them already living there, because he did when he inspired the same story to another author. Makes you wonder if God forgot about his own story as he told it two completely different ways, or if maybe, just maybe, there is no God involved in the story at all. It's just two different versions of a fable about a legendary birth. Joseph looks lost. You would think God would have given him better instructions on what to do.
Mary took in the sights and sounds of a world too busy and too sinful to notice the Messiah would be born among them.
Got in another dig on sex workers. David Jeramiah, why don't you just sleep with one of the lovely ladies? Maybe you might not need to feel so judgmental then.
No. Griffin, go.
Sorry about it. My wife and I, we've been traveling all day and night. We've been walking all around here. We came from Nazareth. She's pregnant.
Yeah.
She's getting ready to give birth. I just need to see if you have any rooms.
Yeah.
I'm a carpenter. I can, please.
Okay, so they did tie in the scene where the kid stole the bread. This is the same kid. They are going to his little cave. So Jesus gets born in the thief's den. Interesting plot twist. Spices the story up a bit more. And this most likely is how we got the versions of the Bible. Each person repeated the story, adding their own embellishments, until we get to the person that wrote it down. How close is this to what really happened, if any of it happened, is anyone's guess.
This event was no momentary impulse. It was the decisive moment in human history, the place and condition of his birth, prearranged by God.
Now hold on a minute. You showed us Joseph being confused, not knowing where to go. Joseph being turned down at multiple places. Mary at the town well not being taken in by a family. This, incidentally, was the custom. If you don't have a place to go, you go to the well, and cultural norms demanded that you take in and offer hospitality to travelers if you could. That Mary was not invited in while she sat at the well was the height of rudeness by all who saw her. You would think that if all of this was planned by God, he would have done a bit more to ensure the well-being of the couple coming to bring his son into the world. At least clue them in as to where they're supposed to be going. Or better yet, don't send Mary on the trip. It's obvious that this story was written by men. No woman would write the story making a woman who is ready to deliver go travel for 4 days so her husband can be there for the birth. Just let her stay home. It's the women of her village who are going to attend her during the birth, not her husband.
Jesus would send a message of stubborn, unbreakable love to the world. We had no room for him, but homeless no more. One day he will throw open the doors of heaven so that no one might be left in the cold.
Except that isn't what your theology says. It would if you were a universalist, but David Jeramiah is not a universalist. He's a Baptist. Baptists do come in a variety of flavors: Southern Baptist, Central Baptist, Reformed Baptist, and National Baptist Convention, just to name a few. And this theology says that only a few are welcomed into God's heaven. Whether that few is the predestined chosen ones, as the Reformed Baptists say, or the ones who choose to believe, as the Southern Baptists say, is in dispute. But despite not agreeing on who goes to heaven and how one gets there, they do agree that only a small minority of humanity is able to do this. So why Jeremiah is implying otherwise here, that his God will welcome all, is beyond me. Anyone can have my unconditional love, provided they meet my conditions. Looks like Herod just got a premonition about Jesus being born. These are supposed to be the Magi. They were all three shown early in the video, in a part that I skipped. A bit of foreshadowing. Okay, that was some pretty good artistry there. It reminds me of the painting Christina's World.
The Lord himself will give you the sign. Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel, which means God is with us.
But they didn't. They called him Jesus, which I'm told is Hebrew for Yeshua or Joshua, not Emmanuel. I'm skipping all the descriptions about the shepherds who enter next.
Imagine the wonder of that evening for those humble field hands. One moment the skies were dark, and their moods were perhaps darker. The next moment their lives would be changed forever, a visitation they would not soon forget, nor cease to recount for the rest of their lives.
Now there were in the same country shepherds living out in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. And behold, an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were greatly afraid. Then the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for behold..."
That is a nice dress. You would think, as up in arms as believers are right now about drag queens, that they wouldn't feature one in their story about Jesus' birth. Seriously, this guy makes a great drag queen. Okay, he needs a bit of makeup. And you aren't afraid to let your kids see him? Can you say hypocrisy?
I bring you good tidings of great joy, which will be to all people. For there is born to you this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the Lord. And this will be the sign to you. You will find a babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger.
Rats. I was hoping we could see all of them. They would make quite the drag show.
They made their way to Bethlehem to take part in an experience that countless generations of Christians have envied, to worship the Christ child. As if to set the tone for the entire life and message of his Son, God brought a delegation of lowly shepherds to be the first to see, to worship, to celebrate. He invited simple people to take the low road, and soon wise men to take the high road, because from that moment, all roads would lead to the manger and the Christ child.
And again, they seem rather lost. They don't know where to go. So typical of this religion. The angel tells them to go see Jesus, but gives unclear instructions as to where in Bethlehem he is. Just like the religion says you have to believe in order to go to heaven, but it is unclear as to what it is you are supposed to believe. It's so unclear that 40,000 denominations of Christian believers can't even agree on what this God says he wants. This is Joseph seeing Jesus' entire life at once. Notice that Jesus looks like a Hebrew person here, but the baby is clearly white. How did Jesus manage to change his race between his birth and his crucifixion? Mary is also obviously white, which doesn't make sense except to appeal to a white audience. The guy from Africa is actually the only one that makes sense. He was west of Bethlehem, so seeing a star in the east and traveling east, he could in fact reach Bethlehem. It's hard to say where the guy in the desert started from, so I can't tell what direction he needed to travel. If he came from Saudi Arabia, he needed to go northwest. If Turkey, south. If Iran or Iraq, west. This is a point of the Christmas story that I facepalmed over when, in my first year as an atheist, I heard Vice Rhino point out,
"After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, 'Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him.'" Okay, this is actually the verse that started my journey into atheism right there. The verse 2. "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." The Magi were from the east. If they saw his star in the eastern end of the sky, they would have been going the wrong direction to get to Jesus. So that's a bit of a biblical error right there. Now, I guess it could be interpreted to be while they were in the east. Remember, if they're seeing a star in the east, they're going to be walking east. But if they are in the east, they have to walk west to get to where Jesus is.
Later versions of the story fix the mistake, as it is only in the King James Version. The rest say the Magi were from the east, and they say they saw the star rise in the sky. So by all versions, the African guy can't be one of the Magi. He didn't come from the east. He came from the west. But the one I find most interesting for the movie is this one. I'm not sure if he's supposed to be Chinese or Japanese, most likely Chinese, since the technology to navigate a ship from Japan to Bethlehem had not yet been discovered. But even the man from China is a huge stretch. The passage over land from China to the Middle East, the Silk Road, won't be discovered for another 1,200 years. But hey, what's 1,200 years between friends, right? If it was possible for Marco Polo, the Chinese could have discovered the Silk Road in 6 BCE and just kept it to themselves, right? If he's supposed to be Japanese, that lends credence to the story that Jesus actually traveled to Japan. The Japanese even have a tourist attraction that they say is Jesus' grave. They say that Jesus switched places with his younger brother who was crucified. Jesus then went to Japan, married, had kids, and lived to be 106. If one of the Magi really was from China, the trip to see Jesus would have taken at least a year. We have another travel bit here. Next question. This guy from Africa, the furthest he could possibly have traveled, will be 5,800 miles, assuming he started from Johannesburg. The guy from China had to travel 7,341 miles. The guy from the desert, we have no idea where he started from, but needless to say, he had the shortest journey by far of the three. Now, how do all of them manage to arrive at Bethlehem at the same time if they all saw the star at the same time and started from different places? As this site points out, stars don't sit in one place in the sky. They appear to rise and set with the rotation of the earth. If they really were following a star, the Magi would have traveled in circles.
But though the coming of a king was prophesied, why was it this particular star, in a sky full of stars, that these wise men were attracted to?
The implication here is that there was some kind of scientific evidence that such a star existed, and that the evidence is unexplainable. But the opposite is true. No evidence for any phenomena exists that could be this alleged star. If it existed, it vanished from the sky. If it existed, it had to be capable of being seen by at least 3/4 of the globe, as these Magi are depicted as being from diverse places. And it had to remain at least a year in the sky as they travel, and then vanishing just as they arrived. Also, it was not noticed by anyone who wrote about such a phenomena, whose work survives to this day. In other words, the only source for the claim that such a star existed is, and even in the Bible, only Matthew records this, the same gospel writer that tells us that there were hundreds of zombies running around Jerusalem during the Passover, but somehow no one managed to notice them except him. Funny how this one person manages to see not one but 2 events that should have been written about by thousands of people, as they were such extraordinary events, and yet he seems to be the only one to do so. In Chinese culture, how you bow shows how much you respect the other person that you are addressing. The lower you bow, the more respect. It is custom to bow as low as the other person bows to you, unless you wish to convey more respect by bowing lower, or less by bowing less. This guy, barely nodding, expresses almost contempt for his fellow Magi. I'm not sure this is what the producer intended. When they started in on the Magi, they jumped from the Luke version to the Matthew version. They cut out the part in Luke where when the baby was 8 days old, they take him to the temple in Jerusalem. When they are done, according to verse 39, they go home to Nazareth. But if they do this, they miss the Magi and the slaughter of the innocents that Herod orders. So the producer here pretends that that part of the story doesn't exist, so he can make the story seem plausible. If you bring this up to believers, they claim that it's possible that Mary and Joseph returned to Bethlehem after going to Jerusalem. And yes, that is possible. But is it plausible? Jerusalem is north of Bethlehem, and Nazareth is north of both. If they go to Jerusalem, they are now about 10% of the way home. So which makes more sense? Finish the journey home or go back to Bethlehem for absolutely no reason, where they have no place to stay. Yes, it's possible. But did the Holy Family really forget where they live? Was the Holy Family really this stupid? Maybe they were. They brought Mary on the journey in the first place.
Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, and said, "Go and search carefully for the young child."
Okay, we're back in Bethlehem after the little jaunt to Jerusalem. Go on with your silly story.
And when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also.
Why are these guys giving lavish gifts to Herod? He didn't even know the baby existed. The narrator skipped the part of the story where Herod calls for the chief priests and teachers of the law to tell them where the Christ is supposed to be born. Since the narrator told us earlier that the Magi knew of these prophecies, and that's why they followed the star, we can't now admit that they don't know about these prophecies and had to get Herod to ask the local priests about them. Goodness, Jeramiah can't even keep the Bible parts straight as he embellishes on them for his drama.
The wise men would never return with news of his whereabouts. While Herod wanted to squash the celebration of the newborn king, it only became greater. A celebration fit for the one and only King of Kings.
Hey, what do you know? Mary and Joseph found a place to stay in Bethlehem. It's likely a year or two later, so that does make sense. But what doesn't make sense is why are they still here if they live in Nazareth? How did the Magi know which house to go to? The prophecy only told them about the city.
The shepherds had come on the night when Jesus was born. But just as Mary and Joseph might have wondered how long their special child would remain a secret to the world, there now appeared these wise men to affirm that Jesus was the Christ, the Messiah.
So where is Jesus? I want to see how old you have him now. Ah, so they do show him. And he's about 2. So again, I ask, why are they here? The Matthew version that has the Magi has them living in Bethlehem at the start. The Luke version, where they have to travel to Bethlehem, leaves you wondering why they are still there 2 years later. Thus, the Luke version doesn't have any Magi, as that makes the story more implausible. He's a cute kid, but again, why is he so white?
And one by one, each delegation addressed the child as king. Mary and Joseph were unlikely to forget the extravagant substances that were laid at the child's feet.
And they give the gifts to the kid. They end the Bible parts there. Jeremiah just preaches over the rest of the footage. They leave out the slaughter of the innocents and the flight to Egypt. This is the most implausible part of the entire story. An angel tells Joseph to take Mary and Jesus to Egypt to avoid the slaughter. The angel makes no attempt to stop the slaughter. Let Herod kill all the baby boys in Bethlehem, because God doesn't care about those babies, only this one. They flee to Egypt to get away from Herod. Then they're ready to return to Bethlehem after Herod dies. Again, why? Did they forget where they live? Guys, you live in Nazareth, not Bethlehem. Then they realize that Herod's son is ruling, which should have been obvious, so they flee to Nazareth, because Nazareth is in Galilee, outside of Herod's jurisdiction. One must wonder why, in fleeing Herod, they didn't just go to Nazareth in the first place. Did they forget that they live there? Are these people stupid? Or was the angel that stupid? The angel is supposed to be bringing a message from God. If the angel is too dumb to realize that going back to Nazareth is the better solution to the problem, then God must be that dumb too. The only way to make the stories plausible is to see them as not two different parts of the same story, but two different stories about how this event could have happened, or two stories about different people who were compiled into the person that we now call Jesus. Neither is historical. Neither should be regarded as anything but speculation, as the authors weren't there. Nor is it likely that the authors ever met anyone that was there. Before we conclude, I do want to include one clip from near the end, again for the artistry. That part was pretty cool. The two best parts of the entire video are found nowhere in the Bible. So why the Nativity? Beats me. The only way to make the story not about a dumb couple that doesn't know where they live is to pick and choose the parts you want for your version of the Nativity. David Jeramiah uses a bit of both stories, but he conveniently skips the parts that he doesn't like because they don't fit. The whole story is a square peg if you want to fit it into the round hole of history. I think I'll just stick to 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. It has just as much possibility of being historical as the Nativity story does. Happy Yule, winter solstice, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Christmas, or whatever you are celebrating this time of year. Live your life.